All right, good people. So what we're going to start with is really the essence of building React applications, right? Which is how do we create a React app if we don't have access to a bunch of high-level libraries? Like, what's the easiest way and more simplest way to start a new React project? And so today, what I want to introduce you to is Vite, which is a React library builder. Like, it builds a React project for you using some JavaScript. So let me just pull up the documentation so we can look at something together, and we'll walk through how we jump into a project using this particular tool chain. So Vite is kind of the default recommended builder for building React applications. If you're building kind of a development application, you're just getting into React, you're starting to code in React for the first, or maybe like this is your first React project, right? The team at React, the actual team that built React, right, is starting to recommend that folks use Vite to build their projects out, right? We used to have a different tool chain that was very popular for folks learning React, which was called Create React App. But nowadays, it seems as though the people who built Create React App are saying, hey, use Vite. One of the reasons why is because it's faster, right? And it eliminates some of the little barriers that happen in Create React App. And so now this is the tool chain that folks are recommending. And so what we're going to do is we're going to launch a basic React app using Vite, talk through the tool chain, talk through the files, maybe tweak a couple things, push it to GitHub, that type of stuff, just so y'all can see how that tool chain works and get yourself a little bit more acclimated with it. So if you're going to build a new React project, you know, here's how I can do this with Vite, and here's how I can push it to GitHub, and what might you need to know to do that. If you're rocking with me and that all makes sense, give me a quick thumbs up so I know that I am making some sense today and not tripping over my words. And we get it rocking. All right. You know what I'm saying? Okay, over 10. Look, you know what I'm saying? I'm just doing it. We're doing it today. All right, boom. So Vite is a tool, command line tool that we use to launch a project. There's a number of different command line tools to launch a React project. That's one of the things that is a little confusing if you're first starting to learn React. You're like, well, do I use Next? Do I use Gatsby? Do I use Create React App? Do I use Vite? Like, which do I use, right? And the reality is you might use either of them based on the type of application you're building, right? Each of these tool chains were built to kind of optimize certain things, and that's why there's so many of them. But the reality is they all do a similar thing for you, which is use the command line so that you can launch a project very quickly. But if you go to each of their websites, you'll see some of the more specific features that each of them are prioritizing, right? So in some capacities, like for tool chain like Vite, right? You see that it's trying to prioritize like speed, right? Okay, instant server start, lightning fast, hot module replacement, right? There's different kind of big features versus other tool chains like Gatsby, which is great for static sites that aren't changing so much, like blogs and whatnot, or Next, which is allowing you to prioritize kind of having server-side rendering at your fingertips and build applications that are using data and reloading with data from the server a lot easier as well. So each tool chain does something specific that makes it worth using on its own, but all of the tool chains do a very specific thing for you, which is when you get started with them, they allow for you to go ahead and start building out React applications. Vite is a very interesting particular tool chain because it is a more general tool chain that will let you launch a couple of different types of React-based projects or JavaScript projects, right? Here you can see they have some presets built into Vite so that you could use Vite to launch a regular React project or a React project with TypeScript. You could use Vite to launch a Vue project or a Vue project with TypeScript, right? They kind of have a couple different presets in it. Today, we're going to focus on using Vite to launch a React project. This is going to show us an example. We don't necessarily need to see it for now. We're going to actually work and build one ourselves. But as I was saying, all the tool chains allow for us to use the command line and use Node to launch a new project for ourselves pretty easily. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to use Vite to launch a new React project. And so all we have to do is actually use one of these commands to create a project for ourselves and kind of see what happens. So we can use the npm create Vite at latest command to create a new project using npm. As you start progressing into your journey with React and Node and JavaScript, you're going to start seeing some folks talking about things like Yarn or PNPM. And just know that these are both package managers that allow for you to essentially add project dependencies to your code. NPM is the standard one that we all know and love because it's built into Node, but Yarn is another one, and PNPM are other and also another command line tool that helps you manage your packages and run your projects. They each allow you, help you accomplish the same thing, but each of those commands are different commands that you have to install on your machine. NPM is built into Node, so long as you have Node installed on your machine, you should be able to use NPM. So we're going to use NPM create Vite at latest to launch a new Vite project. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy this command, right? And I'm going to open a new instance of my terminal. Or if I was on a Windows machine, I'd want to open a new instance of my command prompt or command line, depending on what operating system you're using. So give me 1 second to pull up a new terminal and we can get that cracking. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm gonna just open a new VS Code window altogether, right? And I'm just gonna start a new folder and project for myself. So I'm just gonna click open and just add a new folder for this particular project. So let's see. Just wanna add it in a place where I will remember where it is. So I'll go into my little projects folder, create a new folder in there, and I'm just gonna say Vite apps, and inside of there, I'm just going to open this folder in VS Code, just so I have a place to start messing around with Vite. And I'm going to open the terminal in VS Code itself. So now I have the terminal on the right, and I'm still in this folder on the left, so it'll be easy for me to see anything that I add into this folder here. The reason I want to do that is because all of these project builder commands like next, Vite, Gatsby, whatever, create React app, they all do a very similar thing, which is when we run this command to create it, it's going to create a completely new folder for us for our project, right? So let's walk through what happens when we use Vite to do this. So in your terminal, whether you do it in VS Code or in a regular terminal window, that's up to you. Just type in the command npm space create space Vite at latest, just like this. This is what they recommended on the documentation. What this is going to do, this at latest, is just make sure that when we run this command, npm create Vite, is going to use whatever the latest version of Vite is, so that it can run with whatever latest changes they have going on right there. So I'm just going to go ahead, press enter here, and oops. So if you get this bug that says $ command not found, that's just because you don't want to actually copy this with the $. That's my bad. You want to just type npm create Vite at latest. The $ is just letting you know that, hey, you're supposed to run this in a terminal. Cool. So show a thumbs if you're going to walk around and do this with me at the same time, just so I know. And if not, it's all good. You know what I'm saying? All right, cool. So some folks are doing it with me. All right, cool. So when you run this command, right, you're going to see something pop up that says, hey, project name, right? This is where you would type the name of the project that you want to create. So let's say for right now, I'm going to just say Cam React app or something. You know what I'm saying? So you could name it whatever you want, basically. This is a name for your project. Some of these builders will allow you to put the name in the same command. And I'm sure Vite, we could have done something like this, like put npm create Vite at latest and then the name of our app. But we're just following along and seeing what the builder tells us to do. So first thing we did, we added our project name. You can add your project name, and then it's going to ask you select a framework, right? Because Vite has a couple different frameworks that you can use, right? In our case, we want to use React, right? We want to build a React app. So I'm going to use the arrow keys to go down to React. And it says use the arrow keys to move, press return, which is enter to submit. So once you hover over React, press enter, and then it's going to ask you what type of variant of React are you going to use? And there's a couple different options here. There's some TypeScript options. There's some options that use a set of library components called SWC. For us, we're going to just go ahead and just use regular JavaScript because we haven't talked about TypeScript yet, and we're not necessarily using these particular components that they're talking about here. So we're just going to build a regular JavaScript React application using Vite. So I'm going to hover over JavaScript and press enter, and boom, you're going to see it says scaffolding a project in whatever your folder path is, right? And remember, I made a folder in my projects folder called Vite apps, and here I now have this Cam React app inside of that particular folder. And also it says, okay, done. Now run cd this, npm run this, right? Now, like I said, all of the builder command line tools do the same thing for you in this regard, right? Once you run that command, you're going to have it build a project for you, scaffold a project, which basically means they're going to build the necessary files you need to start this project. Then, as you can see on the left-hand side, it built an entirely new folder for me, right? So if I want to mess with the stuff in this folder, what do I got to do? Well, I got to open this folder, and then I can see all of the different pieces of code and files that were created for me in this folder, right? So if you think about it, right, what it's telling us to do here is it's saying, hey, if you want to start messing around with this particular project, go to that folder that I just created for you, right? So for those of y'all who aren't familiar with command line commands like Linux and just different Windows-based commands to move on the command line, the CD command is the change directory command. This basically is telling your command line, hey, go from whatever directory we are in. The directory is just a folder. So it's saying go from the folder we're in currently to a new folder, to a folder called this, right? And so you can use the CD command to move into another directory, right? And so clearly I have this folder, Cam React app, is created inside of my Vite apps directory. If I type ls, you can see I clearly have a folder inside of here now, right? What this first line is telling you to do is, hey, if you want to just make sure you're able to manipulate this project, move your terminal, right? Because this is all related to the terminal. It's saying move the terminal into the other folder that I just created. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, right? And that is going to change the location I am in the terminal, right? So before I was just in my Vite apps folder, but now I'm in my Cam React app folder. And if you look closely at this path here, you can see that that means that I went from this path, right, that I highlighted to the whole path that it just created for me with this particular folder. So quick thumbs up if that makes sense to you, right? We're just moving our terminal into this new folder that we created because there's a set of commands and different things that were added into that project folder that we want to take a look at. There's code in there. There's some scripts we can call in there. There's a number of things inside of there. And you want your terminal to match that folder. I know that might seem a little tricky for folks, but it's like, they don't really explain it that well for folks who are beginning, but it's important to know, right? They made a folder for you, so you have to go into the folder, right? And it might have been nice if they just went into the folder for you, but you don't want to move from one terminal path to another without knowing they did that, right? So they're saying, hey, just go into that new folder that I created for you and run these two commands, npm install and npm run dev, right? So now that we went into this folder, right, the next thing that we want to do is npm install. And npm install is a particular command that npm does to install a set of packages for us, right? So let's talk about that for a quick second. Now that I've like CD cam React app, right? That means I opened up, I'm inside of this folder, cam React app, and there's a number of different files here. Matter of fact, if I type ls again, you can see all of these files here are the same files that you see here on the left in VS Code, right? Now my directory and my folder are basically linked up, right? So one of the files, and we're going to talk about what all these files are doing in a second, but one of the files that clearly got created in here is that package.json file, right? And again, the package.json file is essentially a file that is like it contains very important information about your JavaScript project that you're working on. So in this case, we're working on a Vite React app, and the Vite commands that create our project have put some very helpful information here about this particular project, right? Some of what it put in there were a couple scripts, right? These scripts have some commands tied to them that are going to help us run our project and build our project for production and servers. They also have dependencies, right? And these dependencies are essentially the libraries that are the most important packages that contain the most packages that we need to use for our project to run. And so if you think about what we've talked about with React, there's two very important packages you'll always use with React apps, which are the React library and the React DOM library. Both of these contain particular packages that we use to make our application, our React application work. Also, you're going to see they have some, well, they define some other dependencies that in Vite, they say, hey, we're going to bring these in for you as well, just in case you're going to use them in your application. The Vite command and package here, different types, or for if we were using TypeScript, and some other stuff for what they said they need for connecting us to React. ESLint is what we call a linter. And that's essentially a package that you can use to help also detect syntax errors and specific code cleanup things that will make your JavaScript code a little bit more ready for production environments as well. And yeah, so this package.json file, for whatever project builder you use, whether you use Vite or not, whenever you use Node or NPM to start a new project, you're going to create a package.json. And so if you were looking at a new project, like they just built this whole project for us, right? It's important to look at the package.json to just see things like, well, what dependencies are they using? And if I don't know what a particular dependency is, I can always look it up and just say, hey, like I'd like to look up what this React dependency is, or the React DOM dependency, etc. That's a great way to just familiarize yourself with what's going on in here. For now, you don't got to worry too much about it, but the reason I'm bringing it up is because that second command that they told us to run, right, in the command line when we were, where was it? Oh, I kind of cleared it already, so we can't see it. They told us to run npm install and then npm run dev, if you remember correctly, right? So the npm install is basically a command that's going to say, hey, install all of these packages that I have defined, right? If there's a package that I need in my project, I have to install it so that I have it, I have the code for that package in my project, right? So the npm install is going to go through all of these dependencies and the dev dependencies and install them into my project. So what Vite was saying was, oh, okay, I made the project template for you. I gave you the packages I know that you're going to probably need to use. Just run npm install to get those packages, and then you should be good to run the app. So go ahead and run an npm install if you're following along with me. It's going to install all the dependencies for you, and it's going to create a new folder to hold all of those dependencies for you as well. And when it works, and if you've done it, or if you just are following along, you're like, okay, that makes sense. Just give me a thumbs up and I would appreciate it. Cool. Thank you. I appreciate it. Nice. All right, boom. Dope. Cool. So whether you did it or not, right, just take a look at what happened, right? So after I ran this npm install, it says it added 269 packages, audit 270 packages in 49 seconds. Clearly, mine took a little while. Yours might be a little faster, depending on things like your processor, internet speed, all of those types of stuff. But the idea is it's going to install these packages for us. The reality is that these packages contain JavaScript code that is going to help us launch our project, right? So the third command that it told us to do, the first one was cd into the project. The second one was npm install. And now the third one that it told us to do was to run a new command called npm run dev, right? This command, right, run dev, npm run dev, right? We know npm is the node package management command. We've been using that to install stuff. We just use it again. Run is basically a shorthand in the for npm that lets you say, okay, we're going to use npm to run a script, right? We can define scripts in our package.json. So if you remember, I was just showing you earlier, there's a package.json section for scripts. And one of the scripts that the Vite app defined for us, it defined four for us. You can see all of the scripts are defined here on the left. These are the names of the scripts. And then on the right-hand side, you have the actual code that will be called when that name for the script is triggered. So for the dev, right, whenever we say npm run dev, it's really just going to run this command, which is Vite. And the Vite command is part of the Vite package that we just installed, and it's going to help us do certain things for our application. In this case, when we run npm run dev, and most of these package building kind of components, the script that you use is going to use whatever command was that builder uses in order to launch your project for you to start seeing what your changes look like on a development server. So let's do that. We're going to just do npm run dev. And as you can see, it's called the Vite command, and it says, cool, Vite version 4.5 is ready, and it launched a new local development server for us at localhost port 5173. So what this is if you think about it, a few sessions ago and a while ago, remember we were working on regular HTML, and I was like, hey, it's kind of annoying that we got to keep refreshing the page to see our changes. And I told y'all about, well, we can use this little extension called the live server. How many of y'all remember that? Give me a thumbs up if you remember me yapping about the live server in HTML, right? And that was helpful, right? The live server was lit. Like, give me some, you know what I'm saying? Like, let's show the live server some love real quick. Everybody just show the live server some love. You know what I'm saying? Like that John was lit. You know what I mean? It actually made our life hella easy. I really appreciated that. Yeah, thank y'all. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, let's show moment of silence for the live server, man. That's some real stuff right there, right? The live server made our life easier because it reloaded the page for us. We didn't need to reload the page. Every time we made a change, we could just see the change, right? Well, we want that same dope live server feel when we're building more complex applications, right? And so most of these project builders with React will have a live server kind of situation built into them, which makes it super dope when you're working with these tools because you can see your code. You can see these big projects reload and show you your changes, and you don't have to rerun npm run dev each time and whatnot. It just makes your life a lot easier. So once you do this, what this did was it created a new live server for you for your local, for this code that you have, and it's hosted at this particular URL. They made it so you can click this, I think we should be able to click this. I think if I hold command, I can click it in VS Code, or you can copy it and just bring it over to a browser. And in the browser, you just can open it up in the browser for you. So just go to localhost 5173 when it launches, and that will allow for you to see your current version of your code hosted on a particular local server. So give me a quick thumbs up if you can see this, if you're following along. If not, give me a thumbs up because it made sense to you. And you're like, okay, when I do this myself, I know what to do. All right, lit, cool, word, great, nice, wonderful. So clearly we got some cool stuff going on in here, right? We have the nice little Vite logo, which, you know, Vite in French means quick. And so they have a little lightning bolt as their logo. They kind of cool for that. That's cool. That's kind of cool logo. And it does this nice little hover back on the effect when you hover over it. I like that little background blur kind of drawing. It's really faint, but it's kind of dope. Then on the React side, similar. You have the React logo, nice little animation hover when you hover over it. That's real dope. And then you have Vite plus React, just some text. We have a button that says count is 0, and then we can keep clicking it. It keeps changing the count. And it says edit source/app.jsx to test HMR. Click on the Vite and React logos to learn more. The HMR that it's talking about is really the reloading of the page once we make these changes. And it says click on the React logos or Vite and React logos to learn more. So these probably are linking. Yep, they're linking to some other particular sites. So cool. So this one little pre-builder will launch this particular development server for you. And what they typically do when you launch these development servers is it launches a component for you so you can see how you structure your components. It also will give you some more information, link you to places for more information about what you're doing. The thing we want to do is follow this instruction: edit source/app.jsx and save to test HMR. So let's just do that real quick, and then let's talk a little bit more about what it's going on, right? So source, if we go back to the code that we got installed for us, we can see that inside of our code base, there's a folder called SRC, which is the source folder. This is just a folder that this particular builder uses to store our code, right? And so if we open the source folder, we can see there's a couple different files that were created in here. There's a main.jsx, there's an index.css, there's an app.jsx, and also an app.css as well, right? So it was telling us, hey, go to the source/app.jsx and mess around in here and save it, and you go back and see your changes on your little setup here. So what I'm gonna do is, let's just make this kind of a tiled window for a second, and that way we can kind of see the changes as we do them. So, all right. So all I'm gonna do right now is we'll talk through some of this code, but I mean, if y'all look at it, it's just some JSX. We have this app component. We are using some state here. So state is how we can give our component the ability to track data that's changing and then re-render the data on the screen. So you can see that in the way that this count button is working, right? The count, clearly something is changing data-wise, and the text of this button is changing to match that data, but the page never reloaded, right? That is what the state, use state allows us to do in React, is keep track of data and re-render our components with that data without reloading the entire page. So that's dope. So that's cool. But what I'm gonna do is, as we see, there's a couple different little pieces of components in here. Looks like a couple divs. I'm just gonna close them out real quick so we could just see this at a higher level. Looks like we have some divs in here holding some components, H1, another div and a paragraph. Remember, what we're looking at here is JavaScript code, right? We have a function that's being defined, a variable constant being defined, some import statements. This is JavaScript code. And again, when you start working with React, you're going to be writing JavaScript code. What we see here is not HTML. It looks like HTML, right? But remember, all of this is JavaScript. And what we're actually seeing here is JSX. JSX is the JavaScript markup syntax that we use in React to essentially use JavaScript to write the visual components of our, the visual elements of our components, right? What's unique to this particular builder that we're seeing for the first time, and we haven't necessarily seen in some of the other stuff we've done so far, is that they're using the .jsx extension. right? We've been working with the .js extension, which the .js extension is just a regular JavaScript file. The .jsx is a JSX file extension, which basically just lets this file know, hey, I might write JavaScript, but also I'll have some JSX inside of it. Previously, it wasn't necessarily an issue that we were writing these in JS files, but just for the sake of kind of speeding things up, some research has shown that like using JSX files can speed certain things, certain actions up. And again, Vite is all about making it easier and quicker for you. So they're just saying, hey, you should write your components in JSX files as a standard. So just something to keep in mind. But all the JavaScript that we're seeing here is pretty similar to what we've seen so far in creating a React app. And if this is your first time creating a React app, all you're seeing here is the definition of a new component. React uses components to structure the visual things on the page. All components are going to be functions that return some JSX. And again, like I just mentioned, JSX is this HTML looking syntax that is really defining the visual stuff we will see, but we can write it inside of JavaScript files without it blowing up in our face. So just to test what the Vite thing was saying, I'm going to just change this from Vite and React to just say my first Vite app and save this, and boom, that changed real quick. That's dope. I love that. It's sometimes depending on what tool chains you're using, the loading can take a while. Like it'll load for you, but it might take a quick second. So that's dope. Let's go ahead, just add another little component JSX element in here. Just make a little paragraph for myself. Yo, if you know where this reference is from, drop in the chat. You know what I'm saying? I thought that was a bar right there. I just kind of, just sauce that up real fast. You know what I'm saying? All right, lit. So long story short, we have our first Vite app kind of stood up, and clearly the hot reloading is really kind of coming in clutch for us with Vite. We can see that our app will reload every time we make a change. That's fire. I added a whole new JSX element that rendered almost instantly. And yeah, we can see the rest of the app is here, right? Before we dive into just, continuing to build out like maybe this particular component a little more, let's just take a look at the rest of the files and talk through how Vite is connecting our JavaScript into our HTML. Because if we actually go, so let me just, let me stop dual screening for a second and go back here. And 1 second, y'all, stop this. And okay, cool. Whoops. If we go to our local hosted server, right, and just inspect it, we're going to pull up the JavaScript inspector, and we can see that all of this code is compiling down to HTML for us, right? Remember, when you use the inspector, if you look at the elements in the inspector tab, it will show you the HTML. And now we know this is HTML, right? Because it's saying doc type HTML, right? But clearly inside of here, don't worry about this Grammarly extension. Grammarly be adding itself to all my websites. It is a little creepy, but that's how Grammarly makes money. So shout out to my sponsors at Grammarly. No, I'm just messing with you. As we look at this HTML, right? Clearly the HTML is rendering on this particular site, right? The head has a lot of different stuff going on in it for the first time. I don't think we've seen a lot happening in the head before, but we see some scripts, got some metadata, got some links, got the title for the tab, right? Some style sheets are being linked in here, and yeah, a couple stuff is being connected in here. And then we have the body, right? And as I hover over this, you can see in the background, that's highlighting here as well. Let's see if I can just make this a little smaller so we can still see it, but still see our little site, right? So as I hover over the items in the body, right, we start to see that, hey, there's this div with the ID root that's still being touched. There's some script, a script tag is in here. There's another div that says parent container as ID. And inside of there, it says, okay, shadow root, interesting. It's like Naruto clone, I guess. We got a couple divs, not too sure what's happening in that sense, but just a couple different items in here, right? And eventually, if we open these things up enough, I am assuming, right? Matter of fact, one of the cool things you can do in the inspector, like let's say you're like looking through the inspector and you want to know, hey, like I want to just see where this paragraph or where this H1 is, but you don't want to keep like opening divs and stuff. Just click this tool on the left, which will let you select an element on the page, and then you can click specifically on that element and it'll open up for you the right space. So clearly in that div with the ID root, which makes sense, this is our main div. We have a couple divs inside of here. That one looks like it's got the icons in it. We got our H1 element and our little paragraph. So all of this is checking out as HTML code, right? But remember, with React, we haven't even touched an HTML file yet. So what's happening here? So let's just look at the Vite code and see how is it actually going from our app in Vite, the JSX that we just wrote, and turning it into this HTML for us. So to do that, we're going to close the inspector, go back to the code, take a look at these files that we have on the left-hand side, excuse me. So the Vite app installed a couple different files for us. So we'll go from bottom up. So it looks like they created this config file, a Vite config file, and it looks like this config file is going to be used to for Vite. Remember, Vite has a lot of different plugins and different different types of stuff we can add to a Vite project. So clearly we were adding React. So it's using the React plugin that they have. So this probably is just a little default file for Vite to let it know what kind of app are we building. And clearly we were building a React app. So I guess that's what that's doing there. The README is always a great file to take a look at. So this is just going to give us some good information from that builder tool chain about whatever it built. So it's saying, hey, this template provides a minimal setup to get React working in Vite with the reloading and some ESLint rules. Remember, ESLint is just some rules to help make it so that your code screams at you when certain style of code, like syntax and stuff, aren't being met. And that just helps you write better code. So it's saying, hey, we put that all in there for you. Great, that's dope. Then it's saying, hey, there's two plugins for you to use in Vite, the regular React plugin, and then this plugin with some other components. And that's cool. Very, very minimal README, but hey, to the point. The package.json, we already kind of talked about, right? What's going on in there. Remember, this is the point of entry for our JavaScript files. It's for our JavaScript projects. It will define things like the scripts we can call. So this dev script just launched the project for us. The build script is typically a script that will build your project and so that it's ready to be hosted on a server. So most times you see a build script, that's what that is going to do. You don't really need to use it until you're ready to say, oh, I'm ready to put this app on a website, on an actual server. So you might not need it. The lint script is probably what they were talking about, where they said they installed some basic linting for us. If we ran this script, I'm sure it will just let us know some specific warnings for how to just clean up our JavaScript code. So you can use that there. Dependencies, we talked about all of this. The dev dependencies and the regular dependencies are all the packages we need, and the package.json just holds a list of them. Package-lock.json essentially is a file that gets created whenever you run npm install on a package.json file. It creates this lock file that basically just holds the latest version of all of the dependencies that you've installed, so that the project knows, hey, here's like the last state of my npm install almost, and what modules got installed and stuff. So all 270 or whatever modules that installed, there's a record of them here inside of this package-lock.json. And that is what that is, right? Oh, right here, just smack dab in the middle of our project in Vite, we have the index.html file, which is cool, interesting place to put it. They're like, hey, we're just making this real quick for you. We ain't gonna hide this. It's right here, smack dab in the middle of your project folder. We have a basic HTML file, right? And so clearly doc type HTML. We have, oops, sorry, these pop-ups keep popping up. We have the HTML tags, right? We have our head, our body, right? Inside the head, that's where they're putting a lot of different things. There's some data stuff for the character set, some links to the Vite logo, meta tags that are also just giving us some definition of the just metadata for the browser screen width stuff. And then our title for the tab on the web. And then the body, right? Just like we were saying before, right? Remember when we were writing React from scratch when we were adding React to existing HTML projects, right? We were having to add a lot of stuff into these HTML files, but every React library toolchain that you use is going to minimize what all you need to do in the HTML. So in this case, in the body, there's a div with the ID root, right? And then there's a script, and the script says, hey, it's a type module, and its source is the source/main.jsx. Type module just means that it's going to return an object from this particular file. So there's some object that we got to take a look at in main.jsx that is going to be returned in this Java JSX in this script. So logically, the next place for us to maybe take a look at will be the source main.jsx, but we'll get there in a second. There's just a couple more files right before we get there. The next one is the .getignore, right? This file is important. Y'all might be like, well, what is this file? You might have seen this a couple times. The .getignore file is a file that you can create in any project. It doesn't have to be a React project. You can create it in any project. And you write basically the path to different folders or different files that you don't want to push to Git and GitHub. So whenever we're working with Git, right, Git will take a look at all of the files in our particular folder. In this case, if you want certain files not to be looked at by Git, you can use a .getignore file in order to like basically say, don't look at these files, right? One particular folder that's a great one to have in a .getignore file is the node modules folder. Why is that? Well, when we get there, you'll see the node modules folder is the folder that gets created with all 200 or something packages that we installed when we ran this Vite app, right? Well, that folder can get pretty big in terms of the size of it and like the space it takes up. And it sometimes is not easy to push projects that have a large file size. So by ignoring the node modules folder, you're basically saying, hey, I'm not going to push that big folder up to GitHub, or I'm not even going to watch it with Git because there's just so many files in there, right? This is helpful because anyone can recreate the node modules folder by just running npm install on their own version of your project. So it's not like you're missing anything by not putting the node modules in there, because you can always just reinstall all your your packages by running npm install in your project folder. So you'll see in a getignore file, often folks are going to ignore the node modules folder. It's also going to ignore some other stuff like the VS Code, little directories that get created, stuff like that. So that's what this folder is. This file is, excuse me. This ESLint RC is where they can define some of the ESLint rules that they're going to be looking for in the code. So remember, ESLint is just a tool that you can use to warn you when there's certain like code patterns that aren't being particularly followed. So it'll recommend things for you. So here you can see some of the different rules and stuff that they added in there for you to see. So this is just kind of an ESLint configuration file for the JavaScript project. So the main moment of truth, the source folder, right? So clearly we were messing around in here because they told us to in the Vite app was to like, hey, go ahead, mess around with the source app.jsx. But the source folder clearly is just a folder that is holding basically the main files of our project outside of some of these other important files. Like I would argue all of these files that we've talked about so far are important, but the source folder is where we are going to hold all of our React focused code. And that code is really important because that's what ends up being shown on the browser, right? So inside of this source directory, we have a couple different files. We have this main.jsx, so let's start there. And hey, look, this looks like a very typical entry point JavaScript file that is going to create the connection between our JavaScript and our HTML code, right? It does that because React as a library needs to do two things to work, right? The first thing is it needs us to use the React library and the React DOM package, right? These two packages in order to get the React DOM method that will allow for us to essentially render a component onto our HTML document. This very long, complicated looking line is really just doing a very simple thing, which is it is creating a new place in our HTML document where we can render our React component, right? So the create root function uses it really is giving us the ability to basically create a space within our document, our HTML document, right? Where we can eventually render a component. So again, what's cool about these builder tool chains is it wrote this whole file for us. We didn't need to write this, right? It already wrote this. It already imported the component that it wanted us to render. It already imported some styles for us, so we are good there, right? It brought in the two packages we need, and it created the line we needed to eventually just push our app component onto our document, our HTML document. So the main.jsx file and files similar to this, right? It's not always the case that it's going to be called main.jsx. Every library tool chain will have this maybe named something different. Some will have it called index.js. Some will have it just named in different ways. But you're always going to find that in React applications that are built from React tool chains builders, you're going to have some file that is doing this step, because this step is the step of saying, hey, use React to render a component onto my document. And remember, the component that is rendering is this app.jsx, right? That's this component here that we took a look at that had all of the little JSX in there, some stuff for the state, right? It's bringing in some images for us, right? This is the app.jsx. Once we wrote the function, right, we exported this component, right? So this allows us to create a component. This export line allows us to say, hey, let's export this component so other files can bring it inside. And in the main.jsx, we imported it. So we imported that component that we just exported from this file. And now we can use this component in this file. And what they're using it for is to render it onto our HTML document at the ID root, right? And again, if we go back to our actual hosted, local hosted server, and we inspected the elements one more time, right? Remember what we saw was there in this HTML, there was a div with the ID root, and that div in the body, right? There's a div with the ID root, right here. And this div with the ID root contains all of our little visual code. The JSX got turned into actual HTML, right? So that's what's going on with regards to that main.jsx. It's taking, it's using the React packages that it needs. It's getting our first component that we want to render, and it's using the React package to render that component onto our into our HTML document so we can see it from the server. Now, remember, React.strict mode is just, again, it's a wrapper over your components that some of these builders put in there for you. And the React.strict mode just basically will, again, some of this is meant to give you some errors and warnings when you're doing certain things, React design code wise, that and not design like styling, but just like how you're structuring your code, syntax and stuff like that. This will also give you some warnings and some small errors that will just help you write better React code. So that's what that is. Sometimes you'll see people not have it, so you could theoretically take it out if you wanted to. We only have a couple more files, so let's just breeze through them real quick. We have this index.css file, and this is just a basic CSS file, right? It's defining a variable for our CSS code. This might be interesting for folks. So this is defining kind of like a place for the root. This is defining some stuff for the anchors, right? Any anchors in here, right? And yeah, it's kind of a standard CSS file. Nothing crazy going on in here that we can't learn from a CSS perspective. We have our app.jsx, right? We've kind of spent a little bit more time in this particular file. And then we have the app.css, right? And this is kind of cool because, this is just kind of a basic CSS file, but this kind of shows you in this particular landscape, how do they expect you to write components and then style your components, right? And in this case, you can see, hey, they wrote the component, they function app, right? And then this component, they're returning some JSX, but you can see some of these JSX elements have class names, and those class names correspond to some styles that are clearly inside of this app.css that they're importing here. So if we go to this app.css, you can see some stuff like this class logo, right? Or this card, right? Let's read the docs. And those correlate to some of the class names that you see inside of the elements in this JSX, right? So that's how they're saying, hey, you can just link by importing a CSS file into your particular component to style those components with those particular styles. So that's that. The assets file just has a image for the React logo. This is an SVG, which is just data that represents that image. So that's just holding that React logo for us. Eventually, what they were doing they were bringing it in. So they brought it in here, they imported it here. They also imported the Vite logo, but the Vite logo is held inside of this public directory, I would assume, right? Yep, so here it is. They're bringing in two images, right? And one of them, the React logo, was inside of source assets. The other was hosted, Vite logo was hosted inside of the public directory. Essentially, the difference in that is the public directory, when you finally bundle and build your application, all your code kind of gets put into the public directory. But I guess because they were going to use this Vite logo also in the HTML, they wanted to have a reference to it. So they put it inside of the public folder to start with. So seems like that's what they were doing there. But yeah, other than that, the public directory doesn't really have anything going on. Some builders put the index.html in the public directory, so that's just a difference that I see in between them. And then finally, we have this node modules directory, right? And again, the node modules are just essentially all of the packages that we had to install in order for this project to work and run, right? And the reason it gets so big is because some packages might need other packages, and those packages might need other packages. And as you can see, it kind of just can exponentially expand into how many packages you really need for a project. So whereas in the package.json, it'll be very clear, like what dependencies did we need? And we only needed like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 dependencies. But those 10 dependencies each needed like 20 other dependencies, you know what I'm saying? So that's how it all got to the point where the node modules had so many different packages inside of it. And that's kind of the folder structure, right? How this would work, right, is, okay, well, now that I've launched this Vite project, clearly I have things running. I have this source app.jsx, right? Typically what you'll see people do as they're trying to build out more build out more, build this site out to be a little bit more dynamic or just add more components, right? Of course, you could just add components inside of the app.jsx. You can imagine that this is holding all of the code and visual elements we see here. So if I wanted to do stuff and add more stuff, I could add it into this particular component. But the reality is, like, it's not always the case that you want to just add everything into just one component. So one thing that you'll see people do, depending on the builder, is they'll have another folder where they'll hold other components, right? You could name that folder whatever you want, right? So like, let's say that this particular app is just kind of my homepage, right? Well, I could have a component, I could have another folder inside of the source file and maybe call it pages. And inside of here, I could create a new file that might be like welcome.jsx, just following the convention. And inside of here, right, I could define a new component called welcome. If I want to bring it into a different file, I'm going to want to export it. So welcome, and then just return some JSX. I'll just return. So one thing to note is this is a valid JSX element. This is called a React fragment. So sometimes you'll get these errors that are saying stuff like, hey, React components need to be wrapped by a containing element. A React fragment is just a containing element. So you can think of it like a container that is not really, it's not really an element except for just a wrapping element for some JSX. We actually could see that the app.jsx used one to wrap all of the JSX elements in here. So you can get away with having these be using React fragments if you want to kind of wrap your components, your JSX components with React fragments instead of like a div, or you could wrap it with a div. Oops. Or you could wrap it with like a div like this, you know what I'm saying? So I'll just use a div for now. And then this component, right? I could do something very simple. Do something very simple, like inside of this component, just kind of say, let's build this component. Save this, right? And this is a new component inside of my project, right? With this particular component, right? I could, in some regards, right, because I'm exporting this new component inside of my main.jsx where I'm rendering like kind of the app right now. One thing I could do is I could say, hey, import welcome from welcome.jsx. And if I wanted to render this instead of the app, let's switch this. So now I'm rendering the welcome component. And then when I come back to here, I should see a reload and whoops, failed to resolve import welcome JSX from source/main.jsx. This file exists. So as you can see, if there's errors, we're going to get a nice little helpful thing from, we're going to get a helpful thing here showing us that there's some bugs. Let's see what the error, the error is that welcome.jsx, this doesn't exist as a path, because I put that in a folder called pages. So I gotta actually say, this is /pages/welcome.jsx. This should work. And boom, let's build a new component. That's smooth, like the default CSS that it has. So this is using, when you import a CSS file into a JSX file, it's gonna take all the CSS inside of this file and put it into whatever it's showing. So in this index.css, they must have some CSS for like stuff like the body, look like it's placing things in the center. That's cool. And this H1 is kind of getting styled by this H1 here. So some of these CSS styles are translating down into my welcome component. I didn't even import any CSS in here, but because the index.css has some default styling in there, it still has my drawing looking a little nice. So that's cool, right? So the idea though is, right, I could have many different components. I could make them, I can have them in different folders and just render them in whatever way. One of the things that you'll see typically is the case is that one of the things that you'll see typically is the case is the you'll have your main app.jsx or whatever your main JSX file is where you'll write a lot of components, render a lot of components. And then eventually you'll add different logic to make those components smarter, like adding state into those components, right? So they're importing the use state from React, creating a new state variable called count, and a function to define the count called set count, and a default value of 0 for this particular count. And then inside of the code, remember with JSX, you have the ability to close this so we can see this easier. With JSX, we have the ability to pass JavaScript into our JSX elements using curly braces. So in this case, they're using some JavaScript to write a function that will be called whenever the button gets clicked. That function is this arrow function you see here, where, hey, for every time this button gets clicked, this function is going to call set count, and it's going to change the count to count +1, right? So set count is itself a function, but what this is doing is returning a function. So this is a function inside of a function inside of a function, where this set count is just going to update the count by updating the count +1, but they're using the count value that comes back from the state. So that's cool. And then here's another example of using the JavaScript inside of our JSX. Clearly, every button element will have some text inside of the button. Here they're defining the text, but then they're also passing the state value from the count into it as well. So we have a component, we have the ability to add state to the component. We have the ability to add styling to that component. We can create new components altogether. If I wanted to create another set of components, right? Again, like I could just add it all into my source folder, but sometimes you'll see people also add maybe another folder called components or something. So it just depends on the organization of the project or the particularities of the builder that you use, what kind of, how you kind of add new components, but the idea is the same. Inside of wherever your project files are being hosted, you can create a new file for a new component, and maybe I'll just do message.jsx. And here again, make a new component, function message. Every component returns some JSX. I'll use a fragment this time. And then here, I'll just say, maybe this component has some props, or like it's getting some data from another component, and then it's just going to render, let's just render a paragraph with some data from JavaScript. So we'll render props dot content. Right, so pretty simple little component here. I'm going to export it though, export default message. This, remember, what this is doing is allowing me to say, hey, if I want to make use, sorry that this is tweaking. Why is this popping up? Go away. Go away. Why are you doing this to me? Okay, cool. If I make this component and I want to call that component in a different place, I have to export it from its file. I can save this, and let's say I want to bring it into my app.jsx. I just got to import message from /components, because I made a new folder called components/message, right? And now I can make these components. Maybe I make my paragraph instead of a little paragraph. I'll make it instance of my message. So I'll say message, and because the message is just the message itself is going to render a paragraph, but I just got to pass the data for the paragraph into it using props. So I could do that again by just saying, hey, message, make a prop called content, if I can spell it right, and then set that equal to some data, some JavaScript data. In this case, it'll be a string, and close the message, and boom. Now I got that new component in there. It is still a message component, which should still render a paragraph, but now you can see like, hey, I'm using kind of another default component in there. We're not going to see it actually, now that I think about it, because I took the app.jsx off of the main. So let's go back, switch this back to the app, and we should still see our nice little, the Vite kind of main thing. We got the paragraph in there, still got the state and stuff in there. And yeah, if I wanted to keep adding components, clearly I could add more components either to my components folder or my pages folder and render them appropriately, right? So Vite, as in summary, right, we were able to use Vite to start a new React project. We're able to use that the tool chain to have all the most important files structured for us. We can add new components into this directory and a source. Everything kind of out of the box is done for us to connect our app to the DOM using kind of these React library methods here, create, root, and render, and structure our project the right way. So now all we have to do is focus on things like our JSX files and the app components, whatever components we want, in order to build these nice looking applications. So you can use Vite to launch new React apps for yourself and start the process of building new pieces of code and building websites that you care about and want to share with more people in your life. And with that,